Jake Thompson was just like any other teenager in the small, sleepy town of Maplewood. He lived a quiet life, filled with routines that never changed. Every morning, he woke up at 6 o'clock sharp to help his grandmother prepare breakfast before heading off to school. His afternoons were spent working as a custodian at Maplewood High School, where he cleaned classrooms, emptied trash bins, and mopped floors. To most people, Jake was invisible, a shy boy who blended into the background doing his job without making waves. But Jake wasn't invisible to himself. Inside, he carried big dreams. While he pushed his mop across the tiled hallways of the school, he imagined building rockets, designing machines, or creating something that would change the world. He loved science and technology, even though no one around him seemed to care about those things. At night, lying on his narrow bed in the tiny room he shared with stacks of old textbooks, Jake would stare at the ceiling and wonder if he'd ever get the chance to make his dreams come true. For now, though, reality kept him grounded. Life wasn't easy for Jake. His parents had died in a car accident when he was only 10 years old, leaving him and his grandmother to fend for themselves. Money was tight, and there wasn't much room for luxuries or college tuition. On this particular autumn evening, however, everything felt different. The sun had set hours ago, casting long shadows across the empty hallways of the high school. Jake was finishing his shift, humming softly to himself as he wiped down the last row of lockers. It was Friday, which meant the weekend stretched ahead of him. 2 whole days without having to scrub gum off desks or dodge careless students spilling soda near the vending machines. Just as he was about to clock out, a faint sound caught his attention. It was soft, almost like a whimper, but it echoed through the silent corridors. Curious, Jake paused. He listened closely, trying to pinpoint where the noise was coming from. After a moment, he realized it was coming from room 204, one of the classrooms used for drama rehearsals. Grabbing his flashlight from his belt, Jake made his way down the hallway. The door to room 204 was slightly ajar, and a sliver of light spilled out onto the floor. Pushing it open gently, Jake stepped inside. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. Huddled under a desk in the corner of the room was Emily Carter, a freshman girl who often stayed late for play rehearsals. Her face was pale, her hands clutching, her chest as she struggled to breathe. Tears streamed down her cheeks and her eyes darted around wildly, searching for help. Jake immediately recognized the signs. He'd seen them before during a summer job at a nursing home. Emily was having an asthma attack, and she didn't have her inhaler. Without wasting a second, Jake sprang into action. "Emily, it's okay," he said calmly, kneeling beside her. "I'm here. You're going to be fine." Though his heart raced, he forced himself to stay composed. He remembered the basics of first aid training he'd received years ago. Slowly, he guided her into a seated position, leaning her forward slightly to open her airways. Then, he began coaching her through slow, steady breaths. "Breathe in, hold it, and out," he instructed, repeating the pattern over and over again. Emily tried to follow his guidance, but her breathing remained shallow and labored. Jake knew they didn't have much time. Reaching for his phone, he dialed 911 and explained the situation clearly, giving the operator their exact location. As he waited for the paramedics to arrive, he stayed by Emily's side, talking to her softly to keep her calm. "It's going to be okay," he reassured her. "Help is on the way. Just focus on my voice." Minutes passed like hours, but eventually, the sound of sirens pierced the silence outside. Paramedics rushed into the classroom carrying oxygen tanks and medical equipment. They quickly took over, stabilizing Emily and loading her onto a stretcher. One of the paramedics turned to Jake and nodded approvingly. "Good work, kid," he said. "You probably saved her life." As the ambulance drove away, Jake stood alone in the empty classroom, still holding his flashlight. He hadn't thought twice about helping Emily. It had simply been instinct. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental had just happened. Little did he know, this ordinary day would mark the beginning of a journey that would transform his life forever. Word of Jake's heroism spread quickly throughout the school. By Monday morning, Everyone knew what had happened. Teachers patted him on the back, students whispered about him in the hallways, and even the principal called him into the office to express gratitude. Jake didn't feel like a hero. He was just glad Emily was safe. Still, he couldn't ignore the newfound respect people showed him. For the first time in his life, Jake felt seen. And then, someone else took notice. Someone who would change everything. The buzz around Jake's heroic act didn't fade quickly. In fact, it grew louder with each passing day. Students who had barely acknowledged him before now greeted him in the hallways. Teachers smiled warmly when he walked past, and even the cafeteria staff slipped an extra cookie onto his tray during lunch. For the first time in his life, Jake felt like he belonged somewhere, even if it was just for a moment. But not everyone's interest in Jake came from admiration or curiosity. One person in particular took notice of the young custodian in a way that would alter the course of his life forever. Mr. Alexander Hartwell was a name known across the globe. A self-made billionaire, he had built his empire from scratch, starting with a small tech startup in his garage and turning it into one of the largest companies in the world. His inventions revolutionized industries, from artificial intelligence to renewable energy. Despite his immense wealth and influence, Mr. Hartwell preferred to keep a low profile. He rarely gave interviews and spent most of his time traveling between his homes in different countries, working on projects that aimed to solve some of humanity's biggest problems. On this particular weekend, Mr. Hartwell happened to be visiting Maplewood. He wasn't there for business. Instead, he had come to attend a charity gala hosted by the town's mayor. The event was meant to raise funds for local schools, and as a philanthropist, Mr. Hartwell often supported such causes. Sitting at a table near the back of the banquet hall, he flipped through a copy of the Maplewood Gazette, the town's weekly newspaper. That's when he stumbled upon an article titled, "Teen Custodian Saves Freshman During Asthma Attack." Intrigued, Mr. Hartwell read the story carefully. The article described how Jake Thompson, a 17-year-old janitor at Maplewood High School, had saved Emily Carter's life using quick thinking and basic first aid skills. What caught Mr. Hartwell's attention wasn't just the bravery displayed by the teenager. It was the fact that Jake had acted without hesitation, putting someone else's needs above his own. There was something about the boy's actions that resonated deeply with Mr. Hartwell, reminding him of his younger self when he too had been determined to make a difference, no matter how small. By the end of the evening, Mr. Hartwell had made up his mind. He wanted to meet Jake Thompson. The following Monday, Jake arrived at school feeling more nervous than usual. Over the weekend, he'd heard rumors that someone important was coming to visit the school. No one knew exactly who it was, but whispers of a billionaire and a big donor floated through the hallways. Jake assumed it had nothing to do with him. He was just a custodian after all. So when Principal Myers called him into her office during his break, Jake was completely unprepared for what awaited him. Sitting across from Principal Myers was a tall, distinguished man wearing an impeccably tailored suit. His silver hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his piercing blue eyes seemed to see right through Jake. This, Jake realized with growing unease, must be the mysterious visitor everyone was talking about. "Jake," Principal Myers began, gesturing toward the man. "This is Mr. Alexander Hartwell. He wanted to speak with you personally." Jake blinked, unsure of what to say. Hi," he managed, extending his hand awkwardly. To his surprise, Mr. Hartwell stood up and shook it firmly, his grip strong yet reassuring. "Hello, Jake," Mr. Hartwell said, his voice warm and friendly. "Please have a seat. I've heard quite a bit about you." For the next hour, Jake found himself in the middle of a conversation unlike any he'd ever had. Mr. Hartwell asked questions about his life, where he grew up, what he enjoyed doing, and what his dreams were. At first, Jake hesitated, unsure of why this powerful man cared about him. But as the conversation went on, he began to relax. Mr. Hartwell listened intently, nodding occasionally and offering thoughtful responses. When the topic turned to Jake's future plans, however, Jake's confidence wavered. "I want to study engineering someday," he admitted quietly. "But I don't think college is really an option for me. Not with everything else going on. Mr. Hartwell leaned forward, slightly, his expression unreadable. Why not? Jake shrugged, staring at his hands. It's expensive, and my grandma, she's done so much for me already. I can't ask her to pay for something like that. Mr. Hartwell studied Jake for a moment before speaking again. What if I told you, he said slowly, that your circumstances don't have to define your future? What if I could help you achieve those dreams? Jake froze, certain he'd misunderstood. Help me? How? Instead of answering directly, Mr. Hartwell smiled faintly. Let's take this step by step. First, tell me, are you interested in meeting someone who believes in you and wants to see you succeed? Jake nodded dumbly, still trying to process what was happening. By the time the meeting ended, his head was spinning. Mr. Hartwell hadn't promised anything concrete, but he'd left Jake with a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. Over the next few weeks, Jake's life became a whirlwind of meetings and discussions. Mr. Hartwell visited Maplewood several times, always making time to talk to Jake. During these conversations, they covered everything from Jake's academic strengths to his personal goals. Jake learned that Mr. Hartwell had never married and had no children of his own. Though he had countless employees and associates, he confessed that he longed for a deeper connection, a chance to mentor someone who reminded him of his younger self. Eventually, Mr. Hartwell presented Jake with an extraordinary offer. He wanted to adopt him legally and provide him with every opportunity he needed to thrive. Adoption wasn't something Jake had ever considered, especially not from someone like Mr. Hartwell. At first, he dismissed the idea outright, convinced it was too good to be true, but Mr. Hartwell persisted, patiently addressing Jake's concerns and explaining his intentions. I'm not doing this out of pity, Mr. Hartwell said during one of their talks. I see potential in you, Jake. Potential that deserves to be nurtured. You remind me of myself at your age, determined, resourceful, and kind-hearted. If I can give you the tools to succeed, why wouldn't I? Convincing Jake's grandmother proved to be another challenge. She was fiercely protective of her grandson and wary of outsiders, especially wealthy ones. But after several heartfelt conversations and seeing how genuine Mr. Hartwell was, she reluctantly agreed to let Jake move to the city with him. Her only condition was that Jake visit regularly, ensuring their bond remained intact. As the paperwork was finalized, Jake couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. On one hand, he was excited about the possibilities ahead. On the other, he worried about leaving behind the only home he'd ever known. Moving to Mr. Hartwell's sprawling estate in the city felt like stepping into a completely different world, one filled with luxury, privilege, and opportunities he could scarcely imagine. Still, Jake knew he couldn't pass this up. With his grandmother's blessing and Mr. Hartwell's unwavering support, he packed his bags and prepared to embark on the adventure of a lifetime. Little did he know, this decision would set him on a path far greater than anything he'd ever dreamed of, and so, Jake Thompson left Maplewood behind. Not as the invisible janitor he once was, but as someone destined for greatness. Jake's first day at Mr. Hartwell's estate was nothing short of surreal. The mansion was a sprawling masterpiece with towering columns, marble floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the surrounding gardens. Everything about it screamed luxury, something Jake had only seen in movies or glossy magazines. As he stepped out of the car, his suitcase in hand, he felt like an outsider stepping into another world, one where people wore suits to breakfast, and robots vacuumed the floors. Mr. Hartwell greeted him warmly at the door, dressed casually in slacks and a sweater despite owning more expensive clothing than most department stores. Welcome home, Jake, he said with a smile, gesturing for Jake to come inside. Home? Jake thought, glancing around nervously. This place didn't feel like home. It felt like a museum. Still, he nodded politely, trying not to gawk at the grandeur around him. The staff introduced themselves one by one, a chef, a housekeeper, a personal assistant, and even a chauffeur. Jake couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. Back in Maplewood, he'd been used to doing everything himself, cooking meals, cleaning up, and taking care of errands. Here, it seemed like there was someone whose job was to handle every little task. It was both fascinating and intimidating. As the days turned into weeks, Jake slowly began to adjust to his new surroundings. Mr. Hartwell wasted no time in setting up a rigorous schedule designed to unlock Jake's full potential. Every morning started with breakfast in the sunlit dining room, followed by hours of private tutoring sessions with top educators hired specifically for Jake. These teachers weren't just ordinary instructors, they were experts in their fields. Ranging from mathematics and physics to literature and history, for the first time in his life, Jake found himself surrounded by people who genuinely believed in his abilities. But it wasn't all books and lectures. Mr. Hartwell also encouraged Jake to explore hobbies and interests outside academics. He signed Jake up for chess lessons, reasoning that strategy games would sharpen his critical thinking skills. There were coding workshops, robotics kits delivered weekly, and even weekend trips to science museums and tech expos. One Saturday afternoon, Mr. Hartwell surprised Jake with a drone building kit. Together, they spent hours assembling it, laughing when the prototype crashed into a tree on its maiden flight. Those moments, filled with laughter and shared excitement, made the massive mansion feel less lonely. Despite these incredible opportunities, adjusting to his new lifestyle wasn't easy. Jake often found himself missing the simplicity of his old life, the smell of his grandmother's homemade soup simmering on the stove, the sound of her voice humming old songs while she knitted by the window. Late at night, lying in the enormous bed in his lavish bedroom, Jake would scroll through photos of Maplewood on his phone, wishing he could go back for just a little while. He also struggled with feelings of inadequacy. Surrounded by wealth and success, Jake sometimes wondered if he truly belonged here. Was he smart enough? Talented enough? Worthy enough? Whenever doubts crept in, Mr. Hartwell noticed and reminded him gently, "You're exactly where you're meant to be, Jake. Don't let fear hold you back." One evening, after a particularly challenging math lesson, Jake finally opened up to Mr. Hartwell about his insecurities. They were sitting in the library, surrounded by shelves lined with leather-bound books. Outside, rain pattered softly against the windows, creating a cozy atmosphere. "I don't know if I can live up to your expectations," Jake admitted, staring down at his hands. "I mean, look at this place. Look at everything you've done. How am I supposed to measure up?" Mr. Hartwell set aside the book he'd been reading and turned to face Jake. "Do you think I expected perfection when I brought you here?" he asked gently. "Jake, I chose you because of who you are, not because of what you can achieve. Success isn't about comparing yourself to others. It's about becoming the best version of yourself. Take it one step at a time." Those words stuck with Jake. Slowly but surely, he began to embrace his new reality. He threw himself into his studies, determined not to waste the chance he'd been given. By the end of the first year, he had mastered advanced calculus, built his own functioning robot, and written essays that earned praise from even the strictest tutors. Each accomplishment boosted his confidence, reminding him that he was capable of far more than he'd ever imagined. Yet, as Jake flourished academically, he faced challenges socially. While he attended prestigious events hosted by Mr. Hartwell, mingling with CEOs, scientists, and philanthropists, he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. Conversations about stock markets and international policies went over his head, and he often found himself retreating to quieter corners, observing rather than participating. At school, things were no easier. When Jake transferred to an elite, private academy recommended by Mr. Hartwell, he quickly realized how different he was from his classmates. Most of them came from wealthy families, accustomed to privilege and ease. They drove luxury cars, wore designer clothes, and spoke languages Jake had never heard before. Some treated him kindly, curious about his unique background. Others, however, resented him, whispering behind his back and accusing him of being a charity case or riding on Mr. Hartwell's coattails. The bullying stung, but Jake refused to let it break him. Instead, he channeled his frustration into his work. If people doubted him, he would prove them wrong, not for their approval, but for himself. He poured countless hours into a project he'd been working on secretly, a device designed to purify water using nanotechnology. Inspired by stories of communities struggling with access to clean water, Jake envisioned a portable system that could filter contaminants quickly and efficiently. It was ambitious, but he was determined to make it work. Mr. Hartwell noticed Jake's dedication and offered guidance whenever needed. "This is your passion," he told Jake during one of their late-night brainstorming sessions. "Don't let anyone tell you it's impossible. Innovation comes from believing in ideas others dismiss." With renewed determination, Jake worked tirelessly, testing prototypes and refining designs. His hard work paid off when he earned a spot in a national science fair, representing his school alongside some of the brightest young minds in the country. For the first time, Jake felt like he was standing on equal ground with his peers, not because of his adoptive father's influence, but because of his own efforts. As the date of the science fair approached, Jake prepared meticulously, rehearsing his presentation and anticipating questions judges might ask. But deep down, he knew the road ahead wouldn't be smooth. Critics would scrutinize his work, and failure was always a possibility. Still, Jake reminded himself of something Mr. Hartwell had once said. True success isn't defined by accolades or applause. It's about perseverance, resilience, and making a difference. Armed with that mindset, Jake boarded the plane to the city where the science fair was being held, ready to face whatever came next. Little did he know this event would not only test his resolve but also propel him toward a future brighter than he could have imagined. And so Jake Thompson continued his journey, not as the invisible janitor from Maplewood, nor as the adopted son of a billionaire, but as a young man driven by purpose and fueled by dreams. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to meet it head-on. The National Science Fair was held in a sprawling convention center, buzzing with energy and excitement. Students from all over the country had gathered to showcase their projects, each one hoping to impress judges and win prestigious awards. Jake stood nervously beside his booth, adjusting the display for the 100th time. His project, a portable water purification system powered by nanotechnology, was sleek and innovative, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't be enough. As visitors wandered through the aisles, some stopped to examine Jake's invention. He greeted them with a polite smile, explaining how the device worked and its potential impact on communities without access to clean water. Most people nodded approvingly, impressed by the complexity of his design and the clarity of his presentation. But not everyone was kind. A group of students from rival schools lingered nearby, whispering loudly enough for Jake to hear. "Oh, look," one of them sneered. "It's the charity kid. Did your daddy buy you this project too?" Another chimed in. "Yeah, probably just handed him the idea on a silver platter." Jake clenched his fists but forced himself to stay calm. He'd expected criticism. He knew his background made him an easy target, but hearing those words still stung. Instead of retaliating, he focused on the next visitor approaching his booth, determined not to let negativity derail him. Later that evening, after the first day of judging, Jake sat alone in his hotel room, replaying the harsh comments. In his mind, doubts crept in, whispering that maybe they were right. Maybe he didn't belong here. Maybe he was out of his depth. Just as despair began to take hold, his phone buzzed with a text message from Mr. Hartwell. "How's it going? Remember why you're there, to make a difference, not to please critics." Reading those words reminded Jake of what truly mattered. He wasn't at the science fair to prove himself to others. He was there because he believed in his invention and its potential to help people. With renewed determination, he decided to focus on giving his best during the final round of presentations the next day. The second day started with high stakes. Judges circled the room, asking detailed questions about each project. When it was Jake's turn, he took a deep breath and launched into his pitch. He explained how his device used advanced nanofiltration membranes to remove bacteria, viruses, and harmful chemicals from contaminated water. The process was efficient, cost-effective, and scalable, making it ideal for use in disaster zones or rural areas lacking infrastructure. One judge raised an eyebrow skeptically. "This sounds impressive," she said, "but do you have any real-world testing data? Or is this all theoretical?" Jake hesitated for a split second before responding confidently. "I've conducted preliminary tests using simulated contaminants. he explained, pulling up charts and graphs on his laptop. While I haven't yet tested it in field conditions due to resource constraints, the results so far are promising. I'm actively seeking partnerships to move forward with large-scale trials. Another judge chimed in, challenging him further. What makes your solution stand out compared to existing technologies? There are already several affordable water filters on the market. Jake smiled, ready for the question. Existing solutions often require electricity or specific maintenance procedures, which aren't always feasible in remote areas. My system is completely self-contained, powered by solar panels and designed to last for years without needing replacement parts. It's simplicity, combined with innovation. The judges exchanged glances, clearly intrigued. Though their expressions gave nothing away, Jake felt a flicker of hope. He'd done everything he could to present his idea clearly and passionately. Now, all he could do was wait. After hours of deliberation, the winners were announced during a formal ceremony that evening. As names were called for third and second place, Jake tried to keep his expectations low. He told himself that simply being selected to participate in such a prestigious event was an achievement in itself. But when the announcer read his name, for first place Jake froze, unsure if he'd heard correctly. First prize goes to Jacob Thompson for his groundbreaking work on a portable nanotechnology-based water purification system, the announcer declared, applause erupting throughout the room. For a moment, Jake couldn't move. Then, urged by Mr. Hartwell, who was sitting in the audience, he walked shakily to the stage to accept his award. Cameras flashed as he shook hands with the judges, his heart pounding with disbelief. He'd won, not because of luck or privilege, but because of hard work, creativity, and perseverance. Backstage after the ceremony, reporters swarmed around Jake, eager to learn more about the teenager who had beaten seasoned competitors. One journalist asked, "What inspired you to create this device?" Jake thought for a moment before answering. "Growing up, I saw how difficult life could be for people struggling to meet basic needs. Clean water shouldn't be a luxury, it's a necessity. I wanted to create something that could change lives no matter where someone lives." His words resonated deeply, earning nods of approval from those listening. For the first time, Jake realized the power of his story. It wasn't just about winning a competition. It was about inspiring others to believe in themselves and their ability to make a difference. Returning home, Jake found himself thrust into the spotlight. News outlets covered his victory, highlighting both his scientific achievement and his humble beginnings. Interviews poured in, and invitations to speak at conferences arrived almost daily. At school, the same classmates who had mocked him now approached him with newfound respect, or envy. Some even apologized for their earlier behavior, though Jake didn't hold grudges. He understood that success had a way of changing how people perceived you, but fame came with its own challenges. Suddenly, Jake was expected to juggle media appearances, academic responsibilities, and ongoing work on his invention. Balancing these demands proved exhausting, and there were days when he questioned whether he could keep up. During one particularly stressful week, he confided in Mr. Hartwell. "I feel like I'm losing myself," Jake admitted, slumped on the couch in the mansion's library. "Everyone wants something from me. Interviews, speeches, endorsements. What if I can't live up to their expectations?" Mr. Hartwell listened patiently before replying, "Success amplifies pressure, Jake, but it doesn't define you. You've already proven your worth, not by winning awards, but by staying true to your values. Take it step by step and remember why you started this journey." Those words helped ground Jake. He began setting boundaries, prioritizing his education and personal well-being over constant public appearances. He also continued refining his invention, collaborating with engineers and scientists to prepare it for real-world implementation. Each small victory along the way reminded him that progress mattered more than perfection. By the time Jake graduated high school, his water purification system had undergone successful pilot tests in developing countries. Reports poured in from villages where families finally had access to safe drinking water. Photos showed children smiling as they filled bottles. From the portable devices, their joy infectious. Knowing his invention was making a tangible difference filled Jake with pride and humility. As he prepared to attend a top university on a full scholarship, Jake reflected on how far he'd come. From mopping floors in Maplewood High School to standing on stages addressing global audiences, his journey had been anything but ordinary. Yet through every challenge and triumph, he remained grounded, remembering the lessons instilled by his grandmother and reinforced by Mr. Hartwell. Stay humble, stay curious, and never stop striving to make the world a better place. Little did Jake know, his story was only beginning. The ripple effects of his actions would inspire countless others to dream bigger, work harder, and believe in the possibility of change, even against all odds. Years passed, and Jake Thompson grew into a man who seemed larger than life. What started as a simple dream in a small town had transformed into a global movement. His water purification system, now known as Pure Life, was being distributed across continents, bringing clean drinking water to millions of people in remote villages, disaster zones, and underserved communities. It wasn't just an invention. It was a lifeline for those who had long been forgotten by the world. Jake's journey hadn't been easy, but every challenge he faced only strengthened his resolve. College had been a whirlwind of late-night study sessions, grueling exams, and endless tinkering with prototypes in the engineering lab. Yet, despite the pressure, Jake excelled. He graduated at the top of his class, earning accolades not just for his academic achievements, but also for his leadership and innovation. By the time he received his degree, Pure Life was already gaining traction worldwide, thanks to partnerships with NGOs, governments, and private companies eager to support its mission. Now, standing on stage at a global conference in Geneva, Switzerland, Jake couldn't help but reflect on how far he'd come. The audience before him consisted of scientists, policymakers, entrepreneurs, and activists, all united by a shared desire to solve humanity's greatest challenges. Cameras flashed as Jake adjusted the microphone stand, his heart pounding with anticipation. This moment, the culmination of years of hard work, felt surreal. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. "When I first started working on Pure Life, I never imagined it would lead me here. To be honest, I didn't even think anyone would care about what a teenage janitor from Maplewood had to say. But today I stand before you not as that same boy, but as someone who has learned that no dream is too big if you're willing to fight for it." The crowd erupted in applause, and Jake paused, letting the weight of their admiration sink in. He went on to explain the evolution of Pure Life, sharing stories of families whose lives had been transformed by access to clean water. There was Maria, a young girl from Guatemala who could now attend school instead of walking miles to fetch contaminated water. And then there was Ahmed, a farmer in Kenya who used Pure Life to irrigate his crops, doubling his harvest and providing for his family. These stories weren't just anecdotes. They were proof that innovation, when paired with compassion, could change the world. As Jake concluded his speech, he turned to the screen behind him, which displayed a quote he often thought about. "Success is not measured by what you achieve, but by the lives you touch along the way." He smiled softly. "This project isn't mine alone," he said. "It belongs to everyone who believed in it, including my grandmother, who taught me resilience, and Mr. Hartwell, who showed me that kindness can change destinies." From the front row, Mr. Hartwell watched proudly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He had always known Jake was special, but seeing him inspire thousands of people around the world filled him with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in years. After the presentation ended, attendees swarmed Jake, congratulating him and asking questions about scaling Pure Life's impact. For hours he engaged with them, humbled by their enthusiasm and eager to share his vision. But Jake's success wasn't just about recognition or accolades. It was about giving back to the community that raised him, to the strangers whose lives he touched, and to future generations who might follow in his footsteps. With the proceeds from Pure Life's widespread adoption, Jake established the Thompson Hartwell Foundation, dedicated to funding education and innovation for underprivileged youth. Scholarships were awarded to students like himself, kids with big dreams but limited resources. Workshops were organized to teach coding, robotics, and sustainable design. Jake traveled extensively, visiting schools and speaking directly to young people, encouraging them to believe in themselves and their potential to make a difference. One such visit took him back to Maplewood High School. Walking through the familiar hallways brought a flood of memories, both good and bad. The custodial closet where he once stored his mop and bucket was now converted into a mini lab for STEM projects. Students greeted him warmly, calling him Mr. Thompson and asking for advice on their own inventions. Principal Myers, now retired, attended the event, beaming with pride as she introduced Jake to the current student body. "It's amazing what happens when we invest in our youth," she said during her opening remarks. Jake proves that talent exists everywhere. It just needs opportunity to flourish. Afterward, Jake spent time with his grandmother, who still lived in the modest house they once shared. Sitting together on the porch, sipping lemonade, they talked about everything that had changed and everything that hadn't. Despite his wealth and fame, Jake remained grounded, cherishing the simplicity of home-cooked meals and quiet evenings under the stars. His grandmother teased him about his tailored suits and polished shoes, reminding him that no matter how successful he became, he'd always be her clumsy grandson who tripped over the welcome mat. "You've done so much, Jake," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your parents would be so proud of you." Jake nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I hope so," he replied quietly. "And I hope I'm making you proud too." Her smile said it all. As the years rolled on, Jake continued to push boundaries, tackling new problems with the same determination that defined his early days. From developing affordable solar panels for rural areas to creating apps that connected farmers with markets, his innovations kept coming. Each project was driven by the same core belief: technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. Yet amidst all his accomplishments, Jake never forgot where he came from. He returned to Maplewood frequently, hosting fundraisers and mentoring local students. One summer, he organized a science camp for kids, teaching them how to build robots and conduct experiments. Watching their faces light up with excitement reminded him of his own childhood, when curiosity and imagination fueled his dreams. By the time Jake reached his mid-30s, his name had become synonymous with progress and philanthropy. Magazines hailed him as one of the most influential figures of his generation, and universities begged him to deliver commencement speeches. But none of that mattered to Jake as much as the letters he received from people whose lives had been touched by his work. A mother wrote to thank him for saving her son from waterborne diseases. A teacher described how Pure Life allowed her students to focus on learning rather than survival. These stories meant more to Jake than any award ever could. On a crisp autumn evening, decades after that fateful day in room 204, Jake found himself sitting alone in his study, surrounded by photos and mementos from his journey. There was a picture of him and Emily Carter, now a successful actress at a charity gala. Another showed him shaking hands with world leaders during a United Nations summit. And then there was the faded newspaper clipping from the Maplewood Gazette, the article that had caught Mr. Hartwell's attention all those years ago. Jake picked up the clipping, running his fingers over the worn edges. So much had changed since then, yet the essence of who he was remained the same. He was still the boy who cleaned floors and dreamed of rockets. He was still the teenager who risked everything to save a stranger's life. And he was still the man who believed that even the smallest act of kindness could spark a chain reaction of change. Reflecting on his journey, Jake realized something profound. Heroes aren't born out of extraordinary circumstances. They're made through ordinary choices, choosing to help someone in need, choosing to believe in yourself when others doubt you, choosing to give back to the world, no matter how much or how little you have. These choices, however small, add up to create something remarkable. With a contented sigh, Jake placed the clipping back on the shelf and turned off the lamp. Outside, the night sky stretched endlessly, dotted with stars that seemed to twinkle in approval. Somewhere out there, he thought, were countless other dreamers. kids with untapped potential waiting for someone to believe in them. And Jake knew, deep down, that the best part of his legacy wouldn't be the inventions or the awards. It would be the ripple effect of his actions, inspiring others to rise above their circumstances and reach for greatness. Because in the end, the true measure of success wasn't fame or fortune. It was the ability to leave the world better than you found it. As Jake drifted off to sleep that night, he did so with a smile, knowing he had done exactly that.